afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Cannabis Unlocked. Today, I'm very honored and excited to be joined by Joe Bayern, the new CEO of Brands Inc. Joe, how are you doing today?
Very well, thanks. And thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure working with you over the last several months as we won the transaction to acquire BellRock Brands out of receivership and start the new Brands Inc. company with you at the helm. So, yeah, well, let's definitely get into all that. But maybe to kick it off, I'd love to get a little bit of your career background and how you ultimately ended up finding your way in the crazy cannabis industry.
Yeah, it certainly was a quite a journey. And like the John Lennon song, "Life is what happens when you're busy making plans." That's a little bit of my career. It was never a direct path on how I got to where I got, especially into cannabis. I started my career in consulting. Primarily around helping businesses use technology more effectively. Back in the old days, putting in MRP systems, ERP systems, things of that nature. And one day I got a call from a client of ours who just bought Snapple from Quaker Oats. The original entrepreneurs built up the business and sold it off, and then Quaker bought it, ran it into the ground, and my client brought it back and asked me to help him transition the business from Chicago to New York. It was supposed to be a one-day project, and it turned into a career in consumer product goods. So I joined Snapple Beverage Group, was part of the turnaround team to help take that brand, rebuild it, and then we eventually sold to Cadbury Schweppes out of London. Um, they had both a chocolate and confectionery business as well as a pretty sizable beverage business. And in the US, they owned many brands like 7 Up and Hawaiian Punch and Mott's Apple Juice, and Snapple fit into their portfolio. And once we were acquired, they asked me to help consolidate their multiple beverage units into one cohesive business, and worked on that for about a year, year and a half. Must have done a pretty good job because they then asked me to come to London and run strategy for them globally and help them think about restructuring their portfolio. So I worked on that for a few years, which included coming back to the U.S. and rolling up the rest of our beverage business and our bottling group. And eventually we spun that off as what's known today as Keurig Dr. Pepper. It's a separate publicly traded company. So a lot of business transformation throughout my time at Cadbury, 7 or 8 years. And so I got a little tired of being part of a big company. I want to try something a little bit more entrepreneurial, and joined after Cadbury joined the company called Foss Water. That business was started by two Norwegian entrepreneurs who were friends, and thought there was an opportunity to sell high quality, great tasting water internationally. So they started it. But like many entrepreneurs, they got to a certain level and then didn't know how to scale that business up to be a real global brand. So a colleague of mine and I came in and helped run that company. Over that time, we quadrupled the revenue. We opened up new markets, opened up new channels, and helped it become a nationally recognized premium water brand. We had about 5 core markets, but we were available in 20 or 30 countries by the time I left. While at while at Voss, we started looking at product extensions. And at the time, everybody was talking about CBD. So we looked at CBD water and whether that made sense, or CBD enhanced water with vitamins or other supplements. And as I started digging into what CBD benefits were and where it came from, I realized it was really part of cannabis. And it was like my eyes were open to a whole new world on the other side of the CPG, landscape, and everything that was going on within cannabis in 2018 and 19. And I've always gravitated to large projects, whether they're turnarounds or transformations. And so it was happening in cannabis, and became very intrigued with not only trying to build great companies and great brands, but really trying to birth an industry. So that's what drew me to cannabis. And I've been here ever since.
Wow, that's exciting. And so then talk about your first foray into cannabis and working with Curaleaf and Glorious.
Yeah, my first foray into cannabis was actually with a company called Indus Holdings, which is now, I believe, called Lowell Farms. But at the time, we were a single state operator in California, vertically integrated with cultivation, manufacturing, and distribution, no retail. And I came on board to run that company and help them go public in 2019. I'd done a lot of business turnaround and transformation work, but I'd never actually taken a company public. So I
Mhm.
thought that was a great way to get my experience in the industry by running a single state operator, taking it public, and seeing what the industry was all about. That was in 2019. Toward the end of 2019, I got reacquainted with Boris Jordan, who I'd known when I was in London, and we started talking about where we think the industry is going, and he told me to get out of the farm league and come to the big leagues. So at the end of 2019, I joined Curaleaf first as president, and then eventually as the CEO, and spent 3 years in total at Curaleaf, but about 2.5 years running the company, um, scaling it from about 250 million when I got there to over 1.2 billion on my last earnings call. So expansive growth in a short period of time, and was pretty hectic, but very also very rewarding. So a lot of experience in not only in the U.S., but we also had operations in six countries in Europe. So an international opportunity. But when I left there, I realized that although there was tremendous growth, there was also an opportunity to create a new model in the
Mhm.
industry. So I looked for opportunities to roll up what we're now calling asset light or non operational focused businesses, and joined a company called Glorious at the time. Glorious was in two states, Michigan and Massachusetts. And the thought there was to do a roll up of undervalued, distressed assets that had great prospects and either intellectual property or some kind of expertise that could add to a platform. Uh, we spent a year working on one acquisition and trying to identify a few others. But that business then, for unrelated reasons, got into some financial difficulty. A financial sponsor had an issue with one of the other portfolio companies that dragged us down. So I left there at the end of 2024, but still with the idea that there could be a new model emerging in cannabis. And that model would be a product focused, brand focused, asset light model. And that's what brought us to BR Brands and creating MM Brands is uh, the opportunity to create the next iteration of an operating model that could be successful in cannabis and capitalize on the tremendous potential in the marketplace.
Absolutely. Yep. And I'd love to dive in more specifically to the BellRock portfolio and that transaction. But maybe first, from more of a high level, you've been a big part of both sides of the plant touching space in cannabis, right? You think about the MSO model, right? Vertically integrate, own the supply chain, cultivation through dispensary, right? And then the other, I'd say, kind of main subsector within plant touching has been branded products. And so I'd love to get your thoughts just from a high level is what you see as the pros and cons of both parts of the industry and where you see them going.
Yeah, it's a great question and central to our thesis of working together, which is, I think, eventually the companies that understand how to build great products and great brands will win in this industry. The question is just how you get there and how long it takes to get there. And I think my feeling, having worked at Curaleaf and obviously being familiar with the big MSOs and their strategy is that there's an opportunity to create a new model to capitalize on where the industry is today. Um, Clearly, there was an opportunity, 10 years ago to start driving first mover advantage by going into the marketplace and having capacity when those markets converted to legal markets. That was critical. Yeah, if you were going to be the leading cannabis companies, you had to be in those markets. But it also required a heavy use of capital to go out and buy cultivation assets, operating assets, and retail assets in every single market. So there was never that scale that was needed to be really successful in the industry because of the state by state regulations and the complexity of working across the cannabis legislative landscape. Over time, that model has cracked a little bit because it's taken much longer than people thought to get legalization in place. New entries, new market entrants coming in every day. More capacities being built in each of these individual states, and then of course there were factors like the Farm Bill and intoxicating hemp hitting the marketplace. So for a number of reasons, that model had been placed under pressure, and because of the length of time it's taken to get any meaningful legislation, my feeling is those assets are becoming less valuable every day. I mean, the MSOs have literally spent billions of dollars trying to create first mover advantage, and where they've spent that money isn't creating sustainable competitive advantage anymore. So the question is, how do you create sustainable competitive advantage going forward? And I think long term, that's about creating differentiated products and brands people trust and love. The issue that most people in cannabis recognize is today consumers are not willing to pay for brands. It's the markets are typically commoditized. There's very little product differentiation in the market. As capacity comes on, it puts pricing pressure on all of the competitors in the space, and there's limited outlets for distribution for your products. So the environment isn't ripe today for a pure CPG play, but I think it's getting there, and I think we're getting a few tailwinds with rescheduling, with potentially some activity around hemp in the marketplace, with non-intoxicating cannabinoids becoming more efficacious, and the recognition that they have health benefits. All those things are moving in our favor to start creating this day two model of a more of an asset light CPG omnichannel type model. And that's, of course, what we're trying to accomplish at Brands.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think you nailed a lot of the most critical elements of what's gone on in the cannabis industry so far. And, it's interesting. It's taken longer for brands to emerge, as you highlight. I think for a number of reasons. I think there's just been so much distress in the industry, right? The fact that you can't ship across state lines has made it even more fragmented. The fact that there are so many brands that came up in uncapped states like California, that it really ended up being that if you weren't 1, 2, or 3 in one of those product categories, you couldn't maintain any differentiation besides price. So I think all of those have contributed to why there's been so much distress across all of the cannabis industry. But to your point, I think we're really starting to see the environment normalize, and that's exactly why we felt this was the prime opportunity and timing to buy BellRock out of receivership.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there are other models that are going to emerge. I think a lot of the big MSOs now have kind of pivoted toward, we're going to be a specialty retail. It's about how many outlets I have. I don't think anybody is convinced that, your square footage of canopy is going to be the thing that really sets you apart in the marketplace. At some point, people recognize that's going to be a commodity like other commodities, whether it's, barley or wheat, whatever the agricultural products there are. Of course, there'll always be room for niche players who have, a boutique look and feel to their products. But for large scale, broad stream cannabis companies, most of that should be sourced by third parties. There's very little competitive advantage in my mind, in the cultural cultivation aspect. However, in the formulated product space, there's a lot of room for separation and distinction. And I think if, without getting into too much detail now, think about Mary's Medicinals and what drove us to this acquisition. They've got patented technology that helps create efficacy in their products. It works. The products actually work. And so we're starting to get to that point as new consumers come into the category where they're looking for products they can rely on, products that they could consume for specific needs. And I think that's going to be the big growth area over the next, 3 to 5 years is trying to meet the needs of these consumers coming in, specifically looking for the therapeutic benefits of cannabis.
Yep, absolutely. And so for the listeners' benefit, a quick history on BellRock Brands. BellRock was started as a publicly listed entity on the Canadian Securities Exchange, then went out and acquired two market-leading portfolio of cannabis products, Mary's brands and Dixie brands. Like many cannabis operators at that time, took advantage of the frothy cannabis markets to use a lot of debt for those acquisitions. And then unfortunately, as the capital markets tightened, that upside down balance sheet and becoming effectively a microcap orphaned stock on the CSE eventually drove the business into a receivership in May of 2024. We then ultimately won the business at auction in November of 2025. And Joe, during that time period, you spent a ton of time really digging into the business, building a thesis and getting the deal together. So I'd love to know a little bit more about what about the portfolio within BellRock you found to be such an attractive buying opportunity.
Yeah, it's interesting. During my first stint into cannabis at Indus, we actually produced Dixie brands in California. So we were the manufacturer of Dixie brands. So I had firsthand experience with Dixie, and we had a health and wellness brand at the time that competed with Mary's. So I've seen those two brands coincidentally through my whole journey through cannabis, and I always thought they were both great brands. Dixie was definitely a front runner in the industry. When I think it was the original gummy in Colorado, so has real cannabis heritage, but always stood out as high quality products, innovators, and great tasting, products as well. And that's not always easy to accomplish in cannabis. But Mary specifically, I believe has a real advantage in trying to become a true national brand inside of cannabis, specifically in the therapeutic segment of the marketplace. There are other brands that are available on a state by state basis, but there's really no other brand that covers the number of markets that Mary's does and is number one or number two in the market in every market it participates. And that's, again, comes back to the fact that they have products that actually work and meet the needs of our consumers. So I think we're in the pole position of trying to capitalize on some of these tailwinds and the opportunity in the marketplace. But more importantly, as people come in to the category, as people understand that cannabis can be an all-natural alternative to alcohol and synthetic prescription drugs and even health and wellness through CBD and CBG. They're going to look for brands that they actually trust. It's a very crowded landscape. So I think people will naturally look for brands that are recommended or available, have shown themselves to be leaders in the industry. And I think we're in a great position to capture those consumers coming into the marketplace.
Yeah,
I'll say the other thing that's interesting and other people might agree or disagree, but we've done a lot of consumer work over the years on why people, getting to the root cause of why people use cannabis, and it's pretty interesting. People talk about the recreational market and the medical market, and by some estimates, the recreational market is much larger than the medical market. But when you dig into the core of why people use the product, it's really for the therapeutic benefit of
Totally.
cannabis. And
Totally.
if you look at need states, number one is always sleep. It's helping with sleep, it's helping with pain, and it's helping with anxiety and depression. So those are the need states that are going to be, I think, at the top of consumers' needs coming into the marketplace, and those are the need states we service today through Mary's. So I think we're again in a great position. I think it's a great brand, and there's a lot of opportunity, to grow in the marketplace.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think one of the legacy bottlenecks for Mary's in particular has been the focus historically on the dispensary channel, right? Just given that the typical consumer leans older and is using it for more medical purposes, and that's also not necessarily the consumer that's as comfortable walking into a cannabis dispensary to buy their products. And so BellRock historically had built out a bit of a direct to consumer business for CBD and non intoxicating products. But I think one of the things that brings us a lot of excitement about the opportunity is not only the ability to expand that existing D2C business, but also with rescheduling now soon to be in the books, the ability to open up Medicare and new channels that way. So I'd love to get your thoughts on all of those.
Yeah, I think part of the model that we want to build is what I call an omnichannel, CPG company. So our job is to develop great products and brands that people trust and love, and then build up a system that gets those products into the hands of the consumers in the most efficient way. And
Mm-hmm.
historically, as you said, that's primarily been through regulated markets, dispensaries going through state regulated programs. All of them have variations and complications and differences on how we can package and market and communicate. And within that entire system, what is lacking is the ability to talk to consumers. We can't educate and directly market to consumers, because of the rules, on a state by state basis. So I think with the awareness that we're building around the rescheduling, I think with the awareness we're building around Medicare and Medicaid potentially being open for non-intoxicating products, it's starting a dialogue that people are gaining, education through and awareness of the benefits of cannabis. And I think we should be able to capitalize on that by using multiple channels to communicate with consumers and deliver products to consumers. That includes the regulated market, as we spoke about before. It includes our direct-to-consumer business, which I think will expand over time. And it also includes, what we call traditional channels. So drug channels, C-store channels, I think eventually will open up for certain types of cannabis products. And so
Mm-hmm.
our idea is to build out this omni-channel distribution platform, so that we have these market opportunities that are non-existent today. And when we do that, that's when we'll start building mainstream brand awareness and recognition, and eventually that will lead, I think, to brand affinity and loyalty.
Yeah, absolutely. And having been in the industry now for a number of years, obviously we've all been waiting for some major regulatory reform, especially at the federal level. It appears we're finally getting that with Schedule 3, soon to be official in the books. So I'd love to get your thoughts and your crystal ball outlook on what that could mean and whether you see additional regulatory reform on the horizon, like safe banking.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think a crystal ball is a good way to characterize that, because it literally is like looking at into a crystal ball. Obviously, there's going to be a tremendous benefit for the industry when we get this rescheduled to Schedule 3. Not only will it make our research and development easier, product development easier, but it certainly will, help alleviate some of the burden with 280E, which is the tax provision that is really crippling for most cannabis companies.
Mhm.
So I think it's a big step in the right direction. However, I don't know that it's going to be the single catalyst that catapults the industry, into its $100 billion potential. I think it's a cornerstone in the foundation that we're building. But there are other blocks that have to come in place. And to your point, other pieces of legislation like safe banking are critical. Building out the industry requires capital, and there's a scarcity of capital in the market today. So getting access to capital markets is important. Getting access to institutional investors is going to be important. So that's a critical part of the equation as well. And then you, of course, have to be able to ship across state lines to build scale. Able to have a business that can scale up and meet the needs of our consumers is critical, and one that becomes profitable over time. As far as the crystal ball prediction, the one thing I've learned over the last 7 years is never try to use common sense to understand the timing of what's happening in Washington, D.C., or listen to hearsay, because um, we've been talking about this for years, and it seems like every piece of legislation is a quarter away or 6 months away, and years go by and we are where we are. But I think it's different now. I feel like there's more detailed discussion going on. There's more momentum behind some of these pieces of legislation that are being brought forward, both in the House and the Senate. So I feel like there is certainly momentum behind it. Who knows what the timing is going to be? But I think for us, we're focused on what I think every business should be focused on, which is building a sustainable business, building a good business that has great products, delivers those products to our consumers, and is able to generate a profit and become sustainable in this industry. And so for me, our priorities don't change necessarily with Schedule 1 versus Schedule 3. It's great when Medicare and Medicaid start accepting products. We want to be ready. When we could ship to traditional channels, we want to be ready. So we're building out our platform. We're putting in research and development. We're putting in product development. We're putting in sales resources, channel development, so we could start building third-party distribution into some traditional retail chains. And of course, we're building our capabilities around communicating directly with consumers. So if we focus on those things, we're going to be successful. And hopefully, the Washington, D.C. issues get sorted out and we get some reasonable legislation coming out of 2026.
Absolutely. And you've mentioned a few times the challenges in cannabis brands include the fact that because you can't cross state lines, you can't operate out of a centralized manufacturing facility, which limits your economies of scale. And this is a conversation we've had a million times as it relates to different markets, but there's obviously pros and cons to replicating your facility and having owned operations in every state versus going with a licensed manufacturing partner versus a co-manufacturing model, which is kind of in between the two. So would love to get your thoughts on the pros and cons of all those and how you think about scaling up brands in the current regulatory environment.
Yeah, it's a challenge that everybody in the cannabis industry is familiar with, and it's not just about driving scale, which is critically important. It's also about driving consistency and quality. Consistent quality of the consumer. It's very frustrating to any consumer to go into a market and look for a brand, and you just don't understand what you're going to get when you buy your product. Is it going to be the same product every time I buy it? Is it going to taste the same? Is it going to work the same? Is it going to basically drive the consistency that's critical for building brand loyalty? So it's a combination of both scale and quality and consistency that's going to, I think, drive branding over time. So the challenge, obviously, today is trying to operate on a state by state basis is not only difficult. Even if you have operating procedures down and you have standards for quality, it's different environmental situations in every one of these operations. There's not really enough volume to automate most of the operation. Even in the big companies, getting real automation and consistency is very difficult. It's expensive, and it just doesn't. It's not justified when you're isolated within one state boundary. So all those things are detriments to growing in the cannabis industry, or impediments that have to be overcome. And I think eventually, one by one, we'll start knocking them down. Obviously, rescheduling doesn't get us interstate commerce, but it gets us a step in the right direction. It will help us, look at research and product development differently. And there is, an opportunity to potentially, if there is a one plant solution coming out of DC, we could potentially get low THC products with high therapeutic benefits manufactured in one facility. And I think that will be, part of what we see in the legislation is some kind of oversight and quality control mechanism so that these products, especially if they're going to Medicare and Medicaid sponsored programs, that there is oversight and quality control over those products. So we'll need centralization there. We're not going to be able to do that, on a state by state basis for every state in the U.S. So I think little by little that's evolving, but it's still going to take some time before we get all the way to Bright and we have full, interstate commerce in the cannabis industry.
Yep, absolutely. And it's a great point you bring up with regards to actually having better testing for medical products to know what actually works in that. And you alluded to the fact that coming out of the government shutdown end of last year, that a continuing resolution was passed that would severely restrict any type of intoxicating hemp products which are currently being sold. Now we know that might change as there's been some pushback around the limits that have been set, et cetera. But the point I'm trying to get to is that I'd love to get your thoughts on whether you think distillate for pure CBD or other rare cannabinoids is as effective as full spectrum, and whether you think there really is an entourage effect and need to have THC in there, or you think distillate can be just as beneficial.
No, I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in this area, but I don't think anybody would argue that THC is the answer to all these issues, or the answer the questions about how do we formulate for sleep and anxiety and depression. I mean, there are just too many need states, and THC is just part of the equation in my mind. It really is the entourage effect. It's the minor cannabinoids, it's the terpenes, it's a combination of strains that are driving some benefit to consumers, and we just don't know enough about that yet to understand what pieces fit together to be able to formulate the products the right way for every one of our consumers. So, and there's a lot. Obviously, it's also natural, so there's a lot of variation from consumer to consumer. So we need a lot more, I think, research behind this. I know what we're starting with by leveraging our technology in Mary's, which is really about transdermal transfer of cannabinoids into the blood system. Better bioavailability means more efficacy, right? So we know that we should be able to leverage that into what formulations we need to be able to address pain versus addressing sleep versus anxiety. And I think whatever need state you're trying to meet, you need to be able to get, the application, the cannabinoids into the bloodstream and have it bioavailable. So, I mean, I think that's one of the things we'll leverage as we do our product development, but I think there's still a lot of work to be done around what drives efficacy across, these products.
Yep, a lot of work that needs to be done, but hopefully with the rescheduling, that'll make the actual research a lot more accessible, and we'll be able to cross our T's and dot our I's.
Yeah, and listen, I think everybody who's looking at this sees new evidence every day about the efficacy of the minors. Like we know, CBD is great for inflammation. There's no doubt about that. We know that CBG, is also an anti-inflammatory. We know that these minors have therapeutic effect. I mean, there are new studies coming out every day, whether it's about inflammation, cancer deterrency, appetite. There's definitely support for the therapeutic benefits of cannabis, but we have to do more work around how do we specifically formulate that for specific need states and specific consumers, and then how do we get the most effective and efficient manner of transferring those into the body so that it can be as effective as possible.
Absolutely. Well, Joe, this has been great. And I just have to say, working with you over the last several months to acquire the asset portfolio has been an absolute pleasure. And we at the Key team are super excited to keep working with you and the legacy BellRock, now Brands team.
Yeah, it's been great. And as I've said many times, it's been a real team effort. It's taken a long time to get here, but I think we have a great opportunity in front of us. And I look forward to working together to really capitalize on the opportunity, not only of this brand, but I think we're in a position to help shape the industry going forward. I think as there's a real narrative going on now around what this industry needs to look like over the next 3 to 5 years, and I think given where we are and our position in the industry, we'll have a lot of impact on what that could look like.
Absolutely.
Great.
Great. Well, thanks again. And I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon.
All right. Thanks, Jordan.